Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dorothy here from CCMA. Welcome once again to our Friday Ask the Expert series. Delighted that you're joining us this morning for, I think, what is a really interesting topic. Catch it, call it, change it is our headline. And obviously, we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion. So on screen this morning, you'll see Mark Fenton, our guest speaker. Hi, Mark. Delighted to see you. And Niamh from WSI, who is our technical support as always. So good to see everybody. We're going to give just a minute or two for everybody to join that's registered. I suppose we were just talking before we came on, and this is certainly a hot topic, diversity inclusion. Of course, the whole Black Lives Matters protest campaign that's going on currently, I think feeds into what we'll be discussing this morning. I just mentioned that CCMA are starting actually a working group on diversity and inclusion, which we're commencing our first virtual meeting this afternoon. So it definitely is a topic that's on everybody's agenda. And hopefully today, our intention is for Mark to give an overview and to give some insights into this as a topic on what companies need to be looking at and changes perhaps they need to be making. But we do want to make it as interactive as possible. So any questions that you have, any comments or observations you wish to make, please just use the chat box over to the right that you'll see there on the right hand side, and I'll keep an eye on that for Mark and let him know if there's any comments or observations, and obviously any questions. And as always, we're recording the webinar, so it will be available for later for you to share with colleagues and friends. And Mark, I think you will share a copy of your presentation deck as well that people will be able to access. So going to hand over to the expert. Mark, it's all in your hands now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorothy, and good morning, everyone. Today's talk is about how you can unblock your potential, your ability to benefit from diversity and inclusion. And you do that by challenging your biases and changing some of your behavior. And why are we talking about diversity and inclusion? Because organizations are challenged on many fronts. I mean, obviously in today's time with COVID, it's a big challenge for all your organizations. But even before then, we had challenges around developing talent, attracting talent. We had challenges around the need for innovation and creative thinking. We had challenges around legislation. And all of this needs as much help as you can get. And that means therefore having a diverse set of skills and experiences and expertise in your organization. And so diversity and inclusion is a business strategy, not a HR issue. It's a business strategy that can help you deal with all of that. So what I want to do over the next 20 minutes is just to take you through an overview of diversity and inclusion and actually describe the difference between those two words and why it's important and what you can get out of it and what's holding you back from benefiting from that. So maybe to start off with is to start maybe with a simple question. And the simple question is, what is diversity and inclusion? But it's not so simple an answer. Diversity, you can think about in many different ways. You can think about identity diversity, which is around gender and age and ethnicity. Or you can have diversity that's acquired through your experience or the expertise you have. Or indeed you have what's called preferred diversity, which is what you like to do with whom you like to do it. So there's lots of different elements of diversity, but I like to have simple definitions, 3-word definitions. So my definition for diversity is simply who we are. Now, is that the same then definition for inclusion? Well, it's not, because inclusion is not who we are, but it's all about what we do with who we are. It's all about what we do with all these different diverse elements that make up us and make us unique and make up all the different people in your organization. So the simple definition for inclusion is how we interact. And those two things are very, very interdependent, but they are separate. What organizations can tend to do is they can tend to focus on the diversity element because that's something that may be measurable. There's a metric around it. We can talk about how many people are represented in what level and what type of people and what age and gender and so on. But just focusing on metrics, focusing on numbers, and not focusing on why you're doing it and what you're going to do with all that diversity can be a mistake. And so the first tip I want to share with you is try not to be what I call diverse in name only, D-I-N-O. In fact, don't be a dinosaur, because if you're diverse in name only, then you're dead already. You're behind the curve. You need to think about actually inclusion and not diversity, not just diversity. And inclusion is the idea that diversity is all these different jigsaw pieces, but its inclusion is the making of the jigsaw. It's the connecting all these things together. And they're different things, they're different shapes, they're different sizes. It's not about assimilating to have every piece of the jigsaw the same. It's about how they integrate together. It's about fitting together as a jigsaw rather than fitting in. And you'll see that sometimes in job descriptions where you're looking for the right job fit, the people fit, the fit in my company. But be careful, because that actually might be quite exclusive. And what you want is you want people to be adding extra to the organization and fitting together to make it successful. The other thing that drives this is our approach to difference. And this quote, "Difference is the difference that makes the difference," goes back to a US sociologist in 1972. And I use that because that's the year I was born, so now you know more about me. And a guy called Gregory Bateson. And this concept of difference is the difference that makes the difference is relevant even much more nowadays, because human beings, as we all are wired to be cautious or downright hostile towards difference. If we see something that's different, if we see someone that's different, if we're in a different situation, we can feel outside our comfort zone, we can feel scared, we can feel we can't connect with that person or that information or that culture. And we're an apple to someone else's orange. And what we need to think about is actually we need to shift our thinking towards difference. We need to actually embrace it. So what we're saying is, rather than I'm different from you and that scares me, how can I connect with you? How can I understand you? To say, I'm different like you're different. And that's exciting, because only by having all these different experiences and skills and ideas are we going to have the innovative, fresh, creative thinking that's going to help us thrive in the competitive environment. Now, to do that, we have to then think about what is holding us back. Because you might say, okay, this matters. And there's a lot of research out there which talks about the benefit of diversity and inclusion, and if you embrace it properly. There's links to financial performance, there's links to innovation, there's links to customer loyalty, there's links to ability to generate market share or to open new markets. So there's a very, very sound business case around doing the smart thing. And there is a well-established moral case about doing the right thing. So if we're convinced that we want to do the right thing, we want to do the smart thing, and diversity and inclusion is the way to do it, then the question I ask you is, why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you more diverse and more inclusive? What is holding you back? And what's holding you back is two things. One is it's hard. It's hard because it takes commitment and consistency and collaboration and courage. But more and more, it's because of our biases and the impact they're having on how we make decisions, how we value people, how we interpret information. That's stopping us from being properly diverse and inclusive. And so the rest of this is talking about how do we actually understand that bias and what can we do about it. And the first thing is, you might say, well, how can I possibly have a conversation around unconscious bias? But I think it's something that can be consciously discussed and consciously captured. If I was to ask you to define obscenity, you'd struggle, but you know it when you see it. The same goes with bias, is that it is something that we can actually catch. We can actually capture this and say, I can see that happening in most cases, in the workplace, outside the workplace. And we can do that, and we're generally quite good at that. The first person we have to actually catch and what we're doing is from us and then from others. But we stop there. And just stopping there and saying, ooh, that was what was said in that meeting wasn't good. That's not appropriate, thinking to yourself. If we're not doing anything beyond that, then we are effectively permitting that behavior and condoning it. So we need to go to the next stage. And the next stage is about calling it out, calling ourselves out and calling others out. And we need to do that obviously in a respectful, professional way, in a timely way. You can't come up with someone 3 weeks after the event and say what you said 3 weeks ago on Monday was outrageous. You have to do it in a timely way, but you don't have to do it in the moment in the room in front of everybody. Perhaps you can have a conversation within 24 hours on the side with someone and explain what you feel. And only by catching and calling, can you then expect change? For you to change your behavior and for others to change theirs. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you to encourage to catch it, to call it, and to change it. Let's talk a little bit about what it is. So, what is bias? Well, it's a tendency or an inclination that results in a judgment without question. And that's the key word, is the without question. It's something that becomes instinctive. It's something that's an automatic response or a shortcut that is based on how we interact with the world. And biases exist because there's so much information out there, there's so much processing that needs to happen in our brains, that our brain needs a mechanism to decide what's important, what's not, what do I have to deal with. And so it designs shortcuts, it designs heuristics, which enables us to say, right, I like blue, therefore next time I see blue, I'm going to feel positive about it. I don't like red, so therefore next time I see red, I'm going to feel negative about it. But then what happens is that we become very stuck in those opinions and those reactions. And whereas bias initially might have kept us alive in terms of fight, flight, freeze, so we know that we ended up being biased against the mammoth on the plane, or biased against falling into the volcano, as we live our modern lives, that idea about fight, flight, freeze, that idea about being cautious towards difference, doesn't work in a workplace, in an international or domestic setting. So we have to think about the impact. What's making us biased is that it is an essential part of the human condition. I'm biased. Everyone on this call is biased. We have some conscious biases, clearly, but we have much more that are actually unconscious. We're making judgments based on the life experience, and the brain is making, in milliseconds, patterns, seeking out patterns of recognition that might be around gender, it might be around age, it might be around ethnicity. And that drives then our reaction to an assessment of every single person that's in front of us. And as we grow and as we live our lives, our bias is influenced and made stronger in a number of ways. How we're educated, our friends and family, the belief or not belief system that we have. But it's the final two that have the biggest impact on our biases. Our place of work, or our virtual workspace these days. But it's because, frankly, that's where we spend all of our time. We're spending more time working than anything else. And the people around us and the impact they have and the behaviors they have an impact on us. And in media too, particularly the millennial and centennial generations now coming through, all of their news and approach and views on life come through media. But if I was to ask you to open up a particular Google search, and we'd have the same search, but we'd all come up with different answers. We have different feeds on our Twitter, on our Instagram, on our LinkedIn, because news is tailored to our needs and our wants, but it becomes more narrow and narrow and narrow. So that actually reinforces our own biases. It's very hard to break away from that. And so we think about two very common biases that exist in organizations. They're around sort of similarity and affinity bias, and how that might impact a couple of decision makings. So let's give an example. We'll start with what is a human maxim, which is that we like people who are like ourselves. And we know that intuitively. And when I mean like ourselves, I can talk about physical characteristics. So whether that could be skin color, it could be height, it could be gender, but it's also social characteristics. We like people who like the same things as us, maybe support the same football team, like the same food, like the same pastimes. And we feel less connected to people who are not like us, either physically or socially. And what does that create then? Well, we tend to be more persuaded by people who are like us because we like them more. So when we like somebody and we listen to what their arguments and their viewpoints, we take them on board more, we value them more. And so we tend to find ourselves in a kind of a homogenous circle where we're all like each other, we're coming from the same perspective, we're all agreeing with each other. So we are thinking as one. It's hard to have a contrarian view or to value a contrarian view in that type of situation. And that's the basis behind groupthink. That's the basis behind, a lot of the damage that's been done in the industrialized world. And what happens in that scenario is when we like people and we're persuaded by them in a work setting, what do? Well, they're the people we hire. They're the people that we actually promote. They're the people that we sponsor. So we're over-indexing in our own image. So there's a people-to-people similarity and affinity that continues to drive the sameness in an organization. It makes it difficult then to have too much contrarian view. It makes it difficult then for people not to conform, which means that when there's a challenge and a need for innovation and creativity and thinking, they don't get valued the same way. Or someone comes from a different perspective, a different background, a different skill set, they don't necessarily get valued the same way. But we also have people to information bias. Some of us here on this call might like detailed information, might like to assess information with a full memo and the full written text. Others, just give me the bullet points, I'll get that. But others are very much pictorial. And you're all right. However you process information and value information is completely individual and unique to you, and that is fine. But there tends to be a bias. So if I'm someone who likes the detail and somebody else gives me what they like, which is a picture, I think it's, I don't value it. I look down on the information. I don't actually see the insights that might be there. And I miss the value of the information presented, and I probably think less of that person, and vice versa. If I send a detail to someone who likes the high level, they're going to think, I'm not going to read this information. This is too much. So we need to be careful about, is there a way in which we do things in our organization? Is there a way in which we present information in our organization? And why is it that way? What about others who think differently? What about others who present differently? Are they being listened to, or are they being excluded from the information? So we want to make sure that we value all the skills and ideas in our organization. And bias can be summarized in this way, that we don't see the world and things as they are. We see them as we are, because we're all looking through our own biased lenses, and we need to recognize that. It's part of human nature, so we all see things differently. We need to first recognize that, and then we can think about what we can do about it. And there are things that we can do about it. There's several ways in which we can overcome this unconscious bias. The first, most obvious one really is pause. It's giving ourselves that time when we make an evaluation on somebody or on something, just to say, why did I feel like that? Why did I think I want to hire this person or promote this person? Was it because they come from the same town as me? Was it because, they have the same education as me? Or was it because they have the right skills and competencies for the role? So you need to double check your thinking. And if you're doing it, with other people, obviously feedback and ask them. So have that pause between you. But pause is also a model, and it's about P for pay attention to all the different biases that are out there and all the different interpretations, and acknowledge that you have a certain way of thinking about things, but use understanding that there are different ways to interpret people and information. Select the one that is most appropriate and execute that for the right decision. So that's pause. The next thing to do is to break that affinity cycle. If I was to ask you, what are you doing this weekend? And who are you going to be in conversation with or in connection with? And what about the weekend after that and the weekend after that? We tend to connect ourselves socially now virtually more than face to face, but it tends to be with the same people doing the same things in the same situations. And when was the last time that we connected with someone who was different to us, or we did something that was very different? Because we can get ourselves caught in that same affinity cycle, and we need to break out of it. One thing that's very, very useful as well in a work situation is evaluating our behavior. We've probably heard about the 3 ways of communicating. One is about actually the words that you use. More importantly is the tone of voice and the tone of what you are saying. But 55% of communication is neither of those things. It's your body language. So are you being micro supportive and assertive? when you're connecting with people. It's particularly important when we're doing things virtually and doing team conversations about having the right body language and support in video discussions, having the right eye contact and leaning in to support rather than folding arms and leaning away. It can have a real impact on the other people who are connecting with you, because we can switch from being microassertive to being microaggressive quite quickly, and that has an impact on others. It has an impact in a recruitment scenario, because if you are microaggressive to a candidate, they get stressed, they don't perform as well, and so they kind of, create that circle whereby they don't perform as well, and therefore you've undervalued them. And why were you microaggressive? There might be an unconscious bias towards them because you didn't think that they were like you or similar to you. So our subtle body language has a huge impact. We can always collect data as well. We can talk about how do we actually know where we are in the organization itself. We can design surveys, but we can also test data on ourselves. A great way to do that is something called the implicit association test. Just look up IAT. It's from Harvard Business School. Over 10 million people have done this test. It takes a few minutes, and it gives you an insight into your own biases towards genders and race, and it's quite fascinating, because everyone has a certain element, and once we learn and collect data on ourselves, then we can learn to change our behavior. But all of this, bias being in the way of benefiting from diversity and inclusion, means that we have to hold everyone accountable, because everyone is going to be impacted negatively if we don't get over this issue and be able to get the positive benefits and results from a more diverse and inclusive organization. And so that's why we have to go through those 3 stages. We have to catch it, to recognize it. We have to then actually learn to call it out in ourselves. Sorry, I'll turn off the alarm. And then we have to change our behavior and the behaviors of others. So it starts with me, catch and call it changes. We can change our behaviors. We can evaluate our messages, hold others accountable, and then I can and will make a difference. But a lot of this is about one thing, and that is our attitude. So if you think that you're not in a position to recognize bias, or you don't feel you are biased yourself, if you think that nothing can change in your organization, if you think that, well, the senior management are the way that they are and I can't do anything, and then you're right, nothing will change. But if you think that, yes, I can recognize some things, I can also call out others, I can change and then be a leader for others to change along with me, then you are right too. You can make that difference, and you can have the impact on your organization so that they can benefit for diversity and inclusion going forward. So that's really where I wanted to say, recognize that challenge our bias and change our behavior can allow us then to unlock the successful benefits of diversity and inclusion to improve talent, attraction, retention, development, improve our connection with customers and understanding of customers, and improve our ability to outsmart our competition. So back to you, Dorothy.
Great, thanks a million, Mark. That was really interesting. A couple of questions to kick off with. So a lot of companies, as you were saying, and we talked about before we came on, was they have a diversity and inclusion person. Which is that the right structure for it? Is that it should be everybody's responsibility? And from what you're saying in terms of calling it out, so if you're a company who maybe haven't had this on their agenda, I suppose implicitly in their values they feel it's there, but there is a problem. Where do you start? What do you do? How do you make it that it becomes part of your everyday consciousness?
Yeah, and I think again, coming back to human nature, our human nature would be to say, let's jump into solution mode. Let's write this policy, let's do this training, let's set up this initiative for sponsoring women, or let's go to schools in different socioeconomic groups and so on. And they're all great ideas, they're all great initiatives, but that's not the starting point. The starting point is, what I follow through is what I call a 5G model, is to start with governance first. It sounds boring, but you have to have the right governance so that it isn't just one person's job who may sit in HR, or it's one person's part-time job when they have time. That there's a clear, broad governance and support You know, there might be some kind of a D&I advisory board or council in the organization that's spread across all the functions because they can see it as a business strategy. Once you have that governance that's then communicated and people can see this has been taken seriously across the board, then that body can set the goals. And the goals being, you know, why are we doing this? You know, don't be the dinosaur. Don't jump into just searching for diversity metrics. We're doing this because we want to create inclusion. We're doing this because we want to create an organization that will attract, retain, and develop our talent. So whatever those goals are, they need to be set. Then you start to deal with the first issue, which is around groupthink, which is around dealing with these people and having bias. And then you're getting into areas around the groups inside the organization. You can have set up little focus groups or employee groups. And only then do you get to the fifth G. The fifth G being the genres, being, okay, will we do a gender policy? Will we do something on disability? Will we do something on LGBTQ+? So it's about going to those 5 Gs, governance, goals, groupthink, groups, and then the genres, that then sets you up with the right framework for a successful strategy.
And 2 questions then. How do you call it out in terms of how do you, I think we talked about this again before we went live, was how do you sort of confirm, yes, there is an issue here, there's a problem here, you know, is it a survey? And then the other things in terms of calling it out, do you need to like have, I know a lot of companies have a staff suggestion box. So do you need some other sort of box that is, this is the call it out box? Going back to your point of, you know, there's no point in 2 weeks after something happening saying to somebody, well, actually 2 weeks ago, you really upset me or you did this and I wasn't comfortable with it or whatever. So how do you manage that?
Well, on the second part, yeah, I mean, there should always be an open, you know, 365, 24/7 staff suggestion loop, right? It's not something that you necessarily have to put into a box once a month. You know, there should be that kind of, you know, there could be either through some sort of a confidential system. And I'm not necessarily talking whistleblowing at that significant level. Obviously, if there are particular, you know, issues around, you know, bullying and harassment or grievance, then that has to be taken to a more formal route. But it's the more micro informal routes that need to be captured, and you can just develop online tools for that. And it's about managers having conversations with their teams to say, listen, I want to learn from you and you from me. So I welcome feedback, you know, and because I know that that's how I'm going to develop myself. So I want to catch call and change. But in terms of gathering data, yes, I think it's really important that there are specific focus data gatherings around diversity and inclusion that are separate from your normal survey, because you can design them where you can ask questions that are much more specific, and you do it in an opt-in anonymous basis, so you can gather data that you wouldn't otherwise be able to around self-declaration of disability or sexual orientation and so on, and ask the people. You know, the best consultants you can ever work with are not people like me. I shouldn't say that. Right? The best consultants you can ever work with are the people who work with you. They're your free consultants there already. They're the people who can tell you what's going on the ground. And there has to be that top-down governance and support with clear goals, but a bottom-up actual operation and development of the action plan.
Great. Okay, we're up against the clock. We literally have a minute left. So Mark, can I thank you very much for your talk this morning. As I say, a copy of the video will be made available. A copy of the presentation will be up later this afternoon. But I know you're more than happy for anybody to contact you directly if they have any further queries or they want to talk to you a little bit more in detail about what they're doing in their organisation. So thank you very much. Just for everybody in the call, in terms of housekeeping, we will be launching our CCMA awards later today, and the application pack is actually up online now for people to have a look at, so please do. And our next webinar will actually be a judges call next Wednesday afternoon, so hopefully we can answer any questions that you have then. So Mark, thank you. Thank you, Niamh, as always, and hope everybody has a lovely weekend. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.